of an estimated $1 billion a day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very excited, but somewhat concerned because I think Barry's a tough act to follow. He lives here. I hope that when we're finished this project, I can be as passionate as he is, but we're extremely excited about the partnership. I'm very grateful to Albert and to Barry for bringing us to Sydney, to bringing us into the partnership and allowing us to share the vision. My part of today's conference is to talk about the dream, but it's to talk about the dream, as they say, dream it and do it. And we're here for the do it. I also want to thank Cecil Clark, because when we did due diligence on the partner, or our partners, and the opportunity, and Sydney, single-handedly, Cecil Clark gave us the inspiration that we had a leader in Sydney that was going to make sure that this project happened. Any project has challenges, any project has tremendous number of details, but it takes leaders, it takes passion, it takes commitment, and it takes support to make these projects happen. You have in your mayor a true great leader, and honestly, were it not for him, we would not be here. We say that projects are like seesaws. Some see and some saw. Let me give you a little bit of background because we are new to you on Canderel, and be able to give you a bit of our history. And forgive me as I run through just some of our accomplishments. There's not enough time to do so, but we are celebrating our 40th year this year, and I got to get used to this. We are active in commercial, residential, retail, and industrial real estate. We were founded in 1975, employing 181 people across Canada. And one of the great pieces and the missing link for us to say across Canada is Atlantic Canada. And one of the things that to me is a missing link and now accomplished is Sydney, which brings us from Sydney to Vancouver. We have 22.7 million square feet, currently under management, third-party management, and 8.5 million square feet of our own space. We have 53.7 million square feet that we have developed in our history over that 40-year period, with actually, it says 8.9, but it's well over $9 billion at this point. The company has the capacity to deal with extremely complex projects, urban projects that are on intermodal stations, projects that transcend 4 and 8 year periods. So to us, being able to have difficult challenges and complex issues that confront the development of the port are comfortable for us, although my grandfather always said, if you want to get comfortable, get uncomfortable. And so we put ourselves in the position of ensuring that we have those challenges constantly. One of the great reasons for me when Daniel Peretz, our Senior Vice President of Canderel, who takes care of Montreal, or actually Ottawa East, was that this is truly a nation-building project. This is an opportunity to link my home, Montreal, with Sydney. This is an opportunity, and the Mayor, Albert, and myself went to visit Mayor Coderre last summer to talk about the opportunity of the twinning of the cities, the linkage between the Port of Montreal and the Port of Sydney. And what better project than to be able to take my feelings for Canada, and as being a strong citizen of Canada, but also of Montreal, and to be able to link Sydney and Montreal in a very important fashion. The transshipment that will come from the large vessels to go to Montreal, extremely powerful. Some of the projects that we've completed, this is the Export Development Corporation project, a 425,000 square foot project we recently completed in Ottawa for the Export Development Corporation on a 20-year term. It was a 2.5-year project led by Daniel Peretz. One that we've just completed this past year is Aura, the 80-story, it's the tallest condominium tower in Canada for probably 1 week because somebody else will do 81. It took us 4.5 years. It was over $600 million. 1,350,000 square feet of space, and quite challenging. The issues of building a 20 or 30-story building are one thing, but when you're up 80 stories and the winds are blowing at 60 miles an hour, and it's a beautiful blue sunny sky day and they can't pour concrete, it's a whole set of different challenges. It is a direct, most of our projects have links with transportation. And it is an intermodal location, both for bus and for subway. On that same site, on that same square, we have a total investment over $1.5 billion and 3.86 million square feet with the towers, 2 residential towers that were built, and 1 million square feet of office space and retail, all around a 3.5-acre park, all on the same block as Aura. In Ottawa, the development and management of Constitution Square, which was done in the 80s and completed in the 90s. Today, just being completed and delivered this week, a 50-story building called Tour des Canadiens 1, which was a joint venture with the FTQ, the Fonds Travailleurs de Québec, the Canadians, and Cadillac Fairview. We had so much fun doing the first one, we decided that there was no point lying down, so as you can see, on the right-hand side is a second tower, which we started marketing in September and is already 80% pre-sold. Will be in the ground in the next 60 days. One of our most challenging projects, and this is being shown to you for a number of reasons. One, it was extremely challenging. It's the headquarters for Bell Canada on Nuns Island, adjacent to the Champlain Bridge. in Montreal. We were given a very tight schedule for what turns out to be a 1.4 million square foot project for Bell's headquarters. It required 3 levels of government. It required the federal government, who were the bridge authority, and port authority, I should say, and who we required tremendous cooperation with in order to change the road network. It required the provincial government, who were going to make $30 million in construction of the road network, and it required all the municipal approvals to get the zoning to go forward. That was done in 2 to 3 months, and the project was completed in 17 months. That's quite a record. A project that we're just finishing the negotiations on, which I'm very proud of, is our development with the Tsuut'ina First Nation tribe in southwest Calgary. They have 80,000 acres in southwest Calgary that go from the wonderful view of downtown all the way to the west and a view of the mountains. It's the most spectacular piece of land, and they have taken 1,000 acres of designated land and entered into a joint venture with Canderel, to 50-50 joint venture, to develop that property for them to create income for the Tsuut'ina. It's not often that you get that opportunity. This is a First Nation group that is very business-oriented and very concerned about self-realization, and I think that we're extremely proud to have been able to be chosen, and that would have been among 40 developers that competed. So today we're here to talk about Novaporte and Novazone. Novaporte, as Barry has said, is essential, and one cannot happen without the other. Novazone is the logistics park, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The development of the port is a unique opportunity for this city. It is a unique opportunity for Canada. It is a unique opportunity for Nova Scotia. And the time is now. I've been involved in many high-tech activities where research was done and entrepreneurial activity went on against the forces of the market, where it was a great idea, a wonderful invention, but the market wasn't ready. We have the opportunity because the market is now. As you'll see later in a video that I will show you, and as Barry has said, there is nowhere for these ships to go. It's our responsibility in this room to make sure that they do have a place to go, and that they recognize Sydney is the only place to go on the East Coast. It will not always be the only place to go, but is the most sensible one because geographically and structurally and functionally, it's the only place that makes sense right now. And others will copy what we do here, but we need to initiate. And that doesn't happen without everybody in Sydney getting on board. We all need to support our leaders. We all need to support the efforts that are going on because financially, economically, for you, for all of your families, this is about having economic success in Sydney on your own. Yes, there'll be some support from the province and the federal government in terms of some infrastructure that may be required, but this is a Sydney project. This will be driven by Sydney. This is a project like we found in Savannah that will drive the multiplier effect of economic activity and ensure that you, your children, and your children's children have the opportunity to have prosperity. And without flying to Fort McMurray for jobs, being able to work in a place where you can go home at night and see your family and your children and develop an economic level of activity where you can look forward to your taxes, whether business or residential, being reduced because the tax base with this investment will be enormous. As Barry said, there's huge shifts coming with the ultra-large vessels. The interesting thing is they can't go up the St. Lawrence. So they need to transfer, and they will be transferring to smaller boats that will go up to Montreal, to the Great Lakes, and be able to service all the way to Middle America. You have a fabulous railroad here that will take rail all the way south, halfway down. Savannah and others will take care of the rest. But that's an enormous market. The inadequate infrastructure along the eastern seaboard, the lack of immediacy to any construction that might get contemplated, the environmental impacts that need to be done, will take them 8, 10, 12 years to get there. We're entitled now. The project is able to go. And everybody that we speak to sees that. They share that vision. Barry and Albert have done an incredible job going across the world selling that message. And now that message, that vision is shared. What we intend to do and have done is visioning and planning of Novazone. It wasn't as obvious to me when we first started that Novazone was vital to the success of the port. There is a symbiosis that goes on between the development of the logistics park, which, by the way, is so wonderfully located right next to the port, versus our visit to Savannah, where the park was split into many different sectors, sometimes 20 and 25 and 30 miles away. It's all about cost. This is all about driving our costs down to be competitive on a global scale, to be competitive, certainly, on a North American basis, so that every ultra-large vessel wants to come to Sydney, not somewhere else. We need winning ingredients to do that. We hired Wener Malcolm, an international architectural firm and planning firm with a specialty on logistics. We worked with them over the last several months to come up with a master plan, looking at the land that was available. And the abundance of inexpensive land is what will help us attract those logistics operations. Savannah practically gave away the land to the major users, and we are prepared to do that to get them here, to incent them to locate. So imagine, just think this through. Home Depot, name any major big box user in Canada or the States, decides, you know, instead of shipping in a container to a distribution center, which is often 500 miles past the designated point where the goods are required, put a major warehouse, 500,000, 1 million square feet, 250,000, even 50,000 square feet in Sydney, at the port, in Novazone. Sort your goods and your merchandise and drop ship it directly where it needs to go. The last mile is truck. That's hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars of saved money for those retailers. Their logistics people look for those savings, need them in order to compete. And our next step is to go out into the market with the major brokerage firms across North America to start to get commitments from those major logistics operations to locate in the port and to be able to avail themselves of that efficiency. In addition, with the free trade zone, there's the opportunity for them to sort those goods, get them organized, put them back on the containers, and not have to pay the tax until they get to their destination. So bravo, Cecil, and the people that worked with you to make sure that we do have free trade zone designation. It's incredibly important. It's also incredibly important because Barry and I saw when we went to Savannah the opportunity to create assembly. Because if the parts are all brought in by container and are able to be assembled in a free trade zone without the taxation that would normally occur, get on a train and go down to the US using cheap Canadian dollars, the adrenaline to the economy is enormous. The opportunity for jobs here are enormous. How many of us could put a huge smile on our face when hundreds and thousands of people are required and they are coming from the West on airplanes to come to Sydney for jobs versus the reverse? I just want to show you some of the modern thinking because we want to develop the most modern port, a semi-automated port that allows for inexpensive movement of goods from the port to Novazone. And part of that is linking it with rail. And I'm just going to give you a small example from our architects of some of the envisioning of what's going on in the future of handling in logistics operations.
We aim to define the sites and buildings that will be needed in the 2020 e-fulfillment market. In 7 years, a lot could change, but where Malcolm decided to take a common sense approach to this challenge. In our concept, we employ current technologies in new and innovative ways to create a viable solution to the 2020 distribution needs. We won't be teleporting goods in 2020. Due to delivery expectations, distribution centers, or DCs, will be closer to consumers and consequently have a smaller footprint. The speed of flow of goods will need to increase and can't be accommodated by current material handling practices. The goods come in on the long end and are stored in light groups requiring larger blocks of space. The flow of goods is limited by forklift speed, traffic, and the grouping of the like products within the warehouse. Point of connection with goods as well as people zones are relegated to the exterior edge, potentially the farthest distance to the desired stored inventory. We need a system of efficiency, decreasing loading-unloading times and decreasing distance to goods. The shortest distance to any point in the building is from the center to the outside. Bringing the goods flow through the center of the building will double the flow of goods by creating 2 unloading and loading areas focused in one central place. Cabs will shuttle goods to an articulated bridge crane, which will load the entire trailer or a container into the building. These will be loaded onto a slow-moving conveyor that runs through the center of the building. The conveyor moves loads through the facility during the upload and reload sequence at a consistent, optimized pace. Goods are stored and retrieved on multiple levels via robotic conveying systems and machines. Goods placement are also computerized to speed retrieval time and restocking sequence. Times are changing. Technology continues to alter consumer habits and expectation. As such, the building environment needs to evolve to respond to these changes. Change necessitates creative thinking as the fittest and most adaptable will survive.
So, Novazone. We're talking about 1,250 acres of industrial land, serviced, master planned in 3 unique phases. I'll identify those phases for you in a moment. Each facility serviced by rail. So the capability of coming from the port by rail to the warehouse. That's optional, it's not obligated, but it facilitates easy movement of goods. Distribution centers, as I said earlier, for national retail and logistics operations. Cross-dock facilities, manufacturing and assembly facilities, hotel and retail to service all the people who work on site, and other essential services. And importantly, refrigerated facilities, which we saw in Savannah, mostly for the chicken industry. I have a feeling it's more likely to be chicken lobsters than it is chickens. But it brings up the most important point that we learned on that trip. It's nice to have all these imports. But if we want a really, truly successful Sydney and a truly successful port, it's about exports. So imagine that each time the crane lifts a box off the boat onto a train or onto the yard, and the crane is here, it's picking a box up and putting it on the boat. That means that every return of the crane is 100% efficient, because if you have the balance of 50-50, in fact Savannah's done even better, they are 60-40 on their exports to imports, we truly have a successful port. It's based on volume, and we need, every time a train comes back from Truro, that it doesn't come back empty, it comes back full. That's economic activity, and that's volume, and volume will reduce cost. What we need to do now is to be thinking about how do we get exports to flow through Sydney? How do we go out and promote Sydney in Canada and the eastern seaboard of the US and through central US and Canada to make people understand that if they're exporting their goods, come east through Sydney. It will lower your time, it will lower your cost, and it's the most efficient way to get your goods throughout the world, because we're putting them on the most efficient ships of the world. So the master plan shows you varying sizes of buildings, a good number of buildings, with major links to road and to rail. This is phase one, and what we contemplate, and I should say, this is a vision, it's a master plan. It represents approximately 16.5 million square feet. Now that's the size of some industrial levels of some major cities across this country. We believe that it's achievable here because once you have 5 or 6 or 10 major users who see the vision, who share the vision, others will follow. But 16.5 million feet is not going to happen in 5 years. It's more likely a 15 to 20-year program. That is why we have broken it down into phases, and it'll get serviced on a phased basis. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I think an essential part of our efforts here is to have green development. One of the things that I think struck Barry and I in one of the parks that we went down to in Savannah was the respect for existing greenery or planted greenery. Unfortunately, in our climate, things don't grow as quickly as they may in Georgia or Florida. But sustainable development, starting with the ships that anchor the development and come to our port, the lack of fuel that they use or the minimal fuel that they use relative to the volume that they take, converting the movements of cranes into electricity, perhaps developing other forms of electricity that are greener, including wind-oriented, gas turbines, and other user-friendly bases to keep costs down in the port. Socially responsible and sustainable development is at the core of Canderel's activities and is the shared vision of our partnership. From a financial perspective, green projects get the attention of lenders, get the attention of users, and are incredibly important to the future of our planet and to the future success of this project. What's left is, what can you do? This is a project that we're going to drive, and you're passengers in that vehicle. It will not get to the finish line unless we're all pulling in the same direction. It's time to lift anchor and set sails for sea. This is an enormous project with a huge investment, but each and every one of you here can make a difference. You can make a difference for your city, for your province, and for your country. This project is important to Canada and to Nova Scotia as the first construct of the railroads across this great nation. This spiritual part of it is our primary interest in the project. Yes, profit is part of it, but the most important part for me, it's the tail end of my career, is to be able to look back on this project in 5 years and say, we did it together, we made it happen, and we have done something strong and powerful for this nation and for this city. I think the tagline at the end, it is the prosperity that Nova Scotians deserve. One of the things that struck me in our trip to Savannah was the true, powerful partnership that Savannah had with labor. Labor is an incredibly important part in this ingredient. We need labor to be on side. We need labor to be able to show to the major shippers of the world that this is a good place to come. This is where there is labor peace and there the handshakes. You saw we used the ship words, that partnership is there. That semi-automation is not about reducing jobs. It's about increasing volume. And more volume, more jobs. We're not going to build an antiquated port. We need to build the most modern port that the world knows so that we can continuously compete against everyone on the East Coast and the West because it's important. So yes, labor is a very important part of this ingredient and a real partner in all of this. What can you do? You can support your premier and you can support your mayor. They need that encouragement to bolster the support of all of the players that are coming to Sydney. We need to be positive. We need to drive together to have a great future. We have but one chance. If we miss it, as Barry said, it will be gone. It will vaporize. And we will look back and say, why didn't we act sooner? Why didn't we act more positively? And for those of you who are thinking of constructing logistics operations in Sydney, think about being in Novazone. It will be the place to keep your costs down to a minimum. Let us all move together from strength to strength and ensure a bright future. Thank you.